Now from Central Lobby by Dominic Grieve. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Dominic, your colleague Anna Soubry has put down a new amendment to the government's trade bill calling for a customs union with the EU once we leave. Theresa May has said that Britain will be leaving the customs union with the EU. Why have you signed up to it?
The Prime Minister is absolutely right that if we leave the EU, we will leave the customs union with the EU because the one is dependent upon the other. But the question which arises is what is in our national interest for the future to avoid tariffs and inspection regimes and enable free trade and the maintenance of an open border between ourselves and our EU partners and the north and south of Ireland. These are important considerations. And my view has always been that the national interest lies in our maintaining those. And if that means being in a form of customs union, then I don't think that's something that we ought to rule out. Now, of course, the Prime Minister's indicated she would like to try to achieve this ability to have a free flow of trade and goods by some other means. And I don't object to that in any way. But I do have some strong views about eliminating the possibility of a customs union, because at the end of the day, I think the likely benefit to the United Kingdom of third-party agreements with other countries is going to be much, much less than the disadvantage of losing that free flow of trade, which I think will have an adverse impact on our GDP.
Right, as you say, you differ with the Prime Minister as to how this future relationship can be achieved. What difference will this tabled amendment actually make?
Well, just to be correct, I don't differ with her about how it might be achieved. If she can achieve it by the means that she is seeking, all well and good. But we should not rule out the possibility of a customs union. And in order to make sure that that issue remains on the table, that's why this amendment's been tabled. And it will mean that when we come to the report stage of the bill, it can be given proper consideration, particularly in the light of where the negotiations have got to by that stage.
But do you accept that following what has been reported from those who attended the Chequers Away Day, the great 8-hour marathon meeting, that it was relatively harmonious? And in supporting this amendment, you are going to make life potentially very difficult for your own Prime Minister?
That, I think, is a misunderstanding of the tabling of amendments. As parliamentarians, we can and should table amendments during the course of passages of bills to ensure that issues are considered that we think are of importance. What decision is taken about this amendment must be dependent on what stage and what the information we have as to the progress of negotiations when it comes back. The point is, we should not exclude the possibility of remaining in a customs union. But that is what we have got to make sure that we keep that issue available for us.
But you want to have Labour MPs support this amendment, and in fact you want the Labour leadership to tell its MPs to back this amendment about remaining in a customs union, which could result in defeat for your government.
I've absolutely no idea whether the Labour leadership, which actually is led by somebody who, broadly speaking, has supported Brexit, will wish to support this amendment. I have little doubt that this amendment will command support across the House. I think it may well command support across a broad swathe of the Conservative Party in Parliament as well. But at the moment, we haven't come to that point. This amendment's been tabled and I support it because it's absolutely essential we should keep this issue available and that we should consider it.
Right, but I've looked at the people who have signed up to that amendment, a large number of Labour MPs, and if you listen to anything that has come out of the Labour leadership's mouths over the last few weeks, it does look as if they are moving to confirming that position, which is like yours, keeping the issue of a customs union on the table. So I say again, if the government was defeated, what would happen then?
Well, if the government were defeated eventually on this, then the government would, I would assume, be required to keep us or seek to negotiate keeping us in the customs union, if that, of course, can be obtained from our EU partners. Everything has that, that issue with it as well. Sorry, excuse me.
That's all right.
So, you know, those are things which one has to keep in mind. Of course one does. But I don't think it would be the end of the government at all. There's no reason why it should be.
Right, I mean, you clear your throat just for a moment because I can see you're struggling there. Heather Stewart, let's just quickly ask about Labour, because Jeremy Corbyn is going to make this speech on Monday. Do you think it'll be the point at which Jeremy Corbyn says we will back the idea of Britain remaining in a customs union with the European Union?
Well, there's certainly been a shift in Labour policy and a coordinated one, because we've seen several shadow cabinet members from kind of different wings of the party, as it were, Owen Smith, Emily Thornberry and others saying the policy is evolving. John McDonnell had some interesting words on this yesterday too. I think it's always dangerous to predict precisely what Jeremy Corbyn will say in one of his speeches. I remember heavily trailed speeches during the referendum campaign, which didn't turn out quite as expected. But yeah, there's very clearly been a shift, and obviously the Labour leadership is extremely keen on inflicting a defeat on the government in the House of Commons if it can.
All right, and so on that basis, Tim Stanley, how dangerous is it for Theresa May? I mean, Dominic Grieve, Conservative MP, says, well, it'll just mean that we will have to keep the idea of a customs union, being in a customs union, on the table. It'll mean more than that, won't it, for Theresa May?
But listening to Mr Grieve then, he seemed to leave a door open to the possibility of a Canada +++ type model of a free trade agreement which delivers all the benefits of a customs union without us being in one. I'm sure he'll want to respond to that. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I see that as the kind of compromise that might happen. We've essentially got three separate positions emerging here. We have that of the government, which hasn't really changed, by the way, where they're saying they want divergence. They will copy what the EU does, but they won't be in the EU. You have the Tory rebel and increasingly the Labour position, which hasn't really changed, by the way, of saying we should be in a customs union. One position which might have changed, The Sun is reporting that some members of the EU 27 are actually in favour of a Canada +++ style deal and don't want to see things dragged down too much by the Commission's negotiators. So in many ways, things have not changed, but I don't see this disagreement between the rebels and the government as completely shutting the door on some sort of agreement.
But what would happen if the government was defeated on this amendment?
It would be very embarrassing, yes, and it would completely undermine the government's efforts at providing a unified front, and it might embolden those within the cabinet, such as Philip Hammond, who take a rather more pro-Remain point of view, which I suspect is what's on the rebels' minds. But I do think people like Mr Grieve and Anna Soubry are perfectly reasonable, and I'm sure can be reached.
Right, but you are prepared, if it comes to it, Dominic Grieve, to inflict an embarrassing defeat on your own government?
I never want to defeat my own government, and I always seek to try to avoid doing that. And after all, I don't actually have a reputation as a serial rebel,
sure.
even though I've voted once on a major national issue against the government.
But you said it was in the national
bill.
interest to keep this on the table. So, I mean, are you prepared to put your principles here ahead of the party?
Well, I think we were just in danger of running ahead of ourselves on this. I've explained what it is that this amendment is designed to achieve. The point was very well made that it may be that, in fact, some Canada +++ arrangement can be arrived at. I'm interested in the reality of free trade without tariffs, without inspection regimes. That's what I want to see. I'm perfectly prepared to consider different options, but I'm not prepared to exclude options in order to achieve that.
Right. What do you say to your colleague Jacob Rees-Mogg, who has said that remaining in a customs union with the EU would mean we would be subject to a common external tariff, meaning higher prices for clothing and footwear, be more expensive for the British public? Does your amendment risk lowering the standard of living for people in this country?
The very reverse. I'm afraid I disagree completely with Jacob's analysis on this. The evidence is overwhelming that if we come out of a customs union, we have no satisfactory arrangements and we have a tariff and inspection regime, the cost of living overall in this country is going to rise, and it's the poorest and most vulnerable who will suffer the most.
Tim Stanley, what do you say to that?
One could argue that, you put it to Mr Grieve that he was creating trouble for the government. You could argue that, in fact, the Brexiteers are creating trouble for the government by saying, for instance, stop the migration, the right of people to settle during the transition. Everyone is bargaining right now. That's all I can really say. It's up to the Prime Minister to somehow navigate things through. And one reason why she always appears so tight-lipped and so difficult to read is because she's juggling so many balls. You could argue that's her fault because she didn't get the majority she wanted to make all this possible. But this week I feel a little more sympathetic to her because we're starting to see the demands of other people within Parliament, and she's got to keep them all happy while also maintaining a clear path for the government.
Dominic Grieve, thank you.